This is 100% true story that I will keep with me until the day I die. A number of years ago, when I was still living at home with my dad and stepmom, we had a large, beautiful, purebred German Shepherd. I had had a rough childhood, and this dog was my best friend. He was the smartest and most loyal dog I had and still have ever met. He passed away a few years after this incident, and I still think of him. Anyway, our house had a long hallway of the living room. Down the hallway was a bedroom on the left, followed by a bath, and my bedroom that was at the very end. I had lived there since I was 2, and I was used to being alone. I usually preferred it honestly, so I was very comfortable in my surroundings. This particular evening, I was sitting on my bed watching TV with my dog laying next to me. The front and back doors were closed and locked, as well as the windows, as I live in the north, especially in the fall, winter, and spring months. It gets quite cold. My bedroom door was closed and latched. My TV and light were on, and one lamp and the living room on. But no other electronics were on in the house. My dog and I were just sitting there on my bed. The two of us watched the door handle turning as if someone were on the other side, opening the door. As the handle turned and the door opened, my dog sat up to attention, looking very tense. The door very slowly creaked open all of the way. I was quite stunned as I knew that I was home alone, and although I just saw the door handle turn and the door open, I could see nothing there that could have opened my door. Suddenly, my dog jumped up and off my bed. He took off running down the hallway faster than I could even react. As I got up to go investigate, I could hear the rumble of his growl coming from the living room. It got louder and louder as I got further down the hallway. When I looked into the living room, he was standing underneath the ceiling fan, directly in the middle of the room, looking straight up. Remember, the fan wasn't on. The only things on in the entire house were a single lamp in the living room and my bedroom light and television. The black hair along his entire back was raised. He stood frozen, snout pointed up and growling fiercely. Stared at him for a second, as I had never seen him behave like this. He was so fixated on whatever it was that I didn't think he realized I had followed him down the hall. Quietly, I called out to him. I called his name and asked him what was wrong. As soon as the words left my mouth, he spun around and stepped to me. He began making a soft whimpering noise, mushing his head against me, pushing me back down the hallway. As I moved backward, he pushed harder. I turned away from the living room, and we were both running back down the hall. By the time we got to bedroom door, I turned my body to face the door as we crossed into my bedroom, and my door slammed shut and locked behind us on its own. I watched from 3 feet away as the lock turned. I have heard and read that when a door is slammed hard enough, the mechanism inside makes it jostled enough to lock itself. But what had slammed the door shut in the first place? My dog stood by the door, not making a sound. He stared at the door handle, not moving a muscle. I called my dad, trying not to sound panicked, as I knew they wouldn't believe my story, and tried to casually ask when he would be home. He told me that they were on their way and about 20 minutes out. My dog stood there not moving, keeping his body between me and the door until my parents came home that night. I don't know what it is that has the power to unlatch and open the door, slam it shut and lock it. I don't know what it was that my dog saw that night, but I could feel that while he was pushing me away from the living room, he was trying to protect me. He knew it wasn't safe. He was pushing me away from whatever he saw or felt. He stood guard for me until my parents came home. He was my best friend and my protector. Rest in peace, buddy. Thank you for keeping me safe.
This happened a few years ago, when I worked as a local exterminator. So one day, I received a call from the manager at the nearby Walmart. They told me that a raccoon had somehow ended up inside the store overnight, and they suspected it was hiding in one of the small spaces at the back of the store where the air comes in. Since I didn't have anything else to do that day, I told them I would be there in an hour. I prepared myself to go to the store. My plan was to catch the raccoon and let it go in the nearby woods. I had a special cage and bait that I had used many times before, and it usually worked well, so I thought it would be an easy job. I made it to Walmart, and a few of the employees directed me to a small hole that appeared to have been busted out of one of the walls in the storeroom. The hole was about 2.5 feet wide by 2 feet tall, so it was just big enough for the cage. Before I walked back to the car for the cage, I wanted to make sure that we got the right place. So I originally planned on just poking my head in and looking for signs of the little guy. However, I couldn't see anything. So, I decided to take it a step further. I got down on my hands and knees and began to pull myself into the wall. To this day, I still have no clue what I was thinking doing. It's one of the dumbest things I have ever done. I made it into the wall, and once inside there was just enough room for me to squeeze my way through, and I didn't have to go far before I began to see raccoon droppings. I called back to let the Walmart employee know that it was the right spot and that I was coming out. To my horror, not only was there no response, but I was now hearing a loud whirling noise. I couldn't turn around because it was too narrow, but I began to feel around with my foot. The hole that I had crawled in had been covered by something, so after I realized this, I immediately began to panic. It was pitch black and I could hardly move my arms and legs. I screamed and screamed for what felt like days, and there was no way to tell how much time was passing in the darkness. It wasn't until hours later that I heard the whirling noise again and saw light come in from behind me. I didn't waste any time and immediately began to slide myself out. As I made my way out of the small hole in the wall, I was met by a manager who was extremely apologetic. Apparently, an employee who didn't know I was back there had placed a pallet of produce in front of the hole. And since I didn't bring my equipment back there, they didn't know anyone was stuck. I was in the wall for 3.5 hours before the manager realized what must have happened and got someone to move the pallet. I tell you, I'm glad I don't have to crawl into tight spaces with critters anymore. I was working the overnight shift one night at Walmart. That time I was on their processing team and we were in charge of receiving the shipments at night, making sure everything was processed right, and then sometimes we would stock the shelves if we had time. One night, we had finished unloading all the trucks and it was the time of the night that my manager would let me take my first smoke break. It wasn't company mandated, but he would let me go out and smoke a few cigarettes during my shift because he knew I got my work done. Anyways, I was outside the loading bay and I noticed a dark sedan parked on the side of the lot. Now, I didn't think anything of it at the time. It was actually pretty normal. Kids from high school would come back there late at night and do whatever they wanted. Whether it was smoking a little weed or spending time with each other, they usually didn't cause problems, so we didn't care. So I just continued smoking. But as I stood there, I could have sworn that I heard a muffled scream, but again, I tried not to pay attention to it. I figured I would mind my business and let whoever continue whatever they were doing. As an 18-year-old, I just assumed it was two people getting a little weird behind the Walmart, so I quickly finished my cigarette and went back to work. A few hours had passed, and it was now around 2:30 in the morning. This was when I typically take my second smoke break. When I went outside, I immediately noticed that the car was gone. At first, I figured that was a good thing, but as I looked closer, I noticed there was a bag sitting in the spot where the car had been parked. I walked up to the empty parking spot and immediately knew what had actually been happening while I was smoking. Besides a small purse that was sitting near where the car was, there was a small amount of blood that seemed to be trailing toward the edge of the lot near the tree line. I couldn't bear to check for myself, so I immediately called the police. After they arrived and got a closer look at the scene, they told me that they did indeed find a body. It was that of a young woman who had been stabbed more than 20 times by the looks of it. I quit that very next day, and have been in and out of therapy since. I can't seem to wrap my mind around the fact that I witnessed such a heinous act, and just brushed it off because I thought it wasn't anything serious. I constantly lose sleep over the thought that I could have done something to help out. Remember, sometimes things aren't always what they seem.
I have several stories of Mexico. It's a place of many myths and legends. This one is one that a friend of mine recounted to me about his uncle and his uncle's friend, stuck in a horrifying circumstance. So my buddy's uncle and his friend were headed home on a highway one night years ago in the state of Oaxaca. You see, they rode in one of those old flatbed trucks that are used to put whatever vegetables or fruits might have been picked that day. They were farmers, most were, as Oaxaca was very rural at the time and had only just had a highway installed of actual concrete. As they were returning home, the uncle noticed something in the rear view mirror and made out what seemed to be a horse about 150 feet away. He couldn't really make out its features and didn't think anything of it till he drifted off to sleep in the passenger seat. As he slept, his uncle had a small nightmare of a horse with large black eyes running up to his passenger side. The dream startled him awake. He gathered his bearings when he looked over to his buddy that was driving. His buddy had a terrified look on his face and was driving about 50 miles an hour, which at the time was pretty fast for a truck that size. He said, "Why are you driving so fast?" He said that for the past couple of miles, that horse in the rear view was slowly inching its way closer and closer to the vehicle. That's when the panic began to settle in, and they both felt immense fear wash over them. They speed up to about 65 to try and get away, but the clanking of the hooves of this horse slowly kept getting louder and louder behind them. The one driving said not to turn around and look anymore, to just look ahead and not look at the horse because it seemed to gain on them whenever they glanced back at it. The uncle closed his eyes in fear, only listening, and when the hooves inched closer and closer, he glanced to the side of the window and saw the large black eyes of the horse looking directly at his friend from the passenger side, as it had now caught up. It was just like his dream. The uncle screamed for his friend not to look and to just look straight because the horse had a fixated gaze on him. They sped up all they could, and still the horse kept a swift pace, still staring at the driver. When he finally glanced, he began to cry, overwhelmed with emotion and panic, when the horse suddenly began to slow down. As it did, the uncle saw it in the rear view mirror once more, except this time it had no legs. It was just standing in the road, floating, staring at them with its huge black eyes. They told the grandfather of the man driving when they arrived home what they had witnessed. And he told them that the road that was built there had gone straight through sacred and Vedal territory, and they had been lucky to drive past the area at this time of night and survive, because everyone had felt that the ground there was patu or salted, meaning washed with bad energy.